Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you need a shortcut to understanding how, well, international competition, propaganda, and even espionage all crashed together during the Cold War, you've definitely come to the right place.
That's right.
Our mission today is really to unpack a stack of incredible sources detailing this intersection of athletics and geopolitics. We're focusing on this idea of athletes serving, often against their will, as diplomats in tracksuits.
That phrase, diplomats in tracksuits, is perfect, isn't it? Sets the stage immediately.
Yeah.
Because the Cold War, as our sources really emphasize, it wasn't just military hardware, not at all.
Right.
It was this intense, decades-long ideological fight, fought culturally, economically, socially, and sport. Well, sport became one of the most visible, most captivating arenas for it all. Every win, every loss was instantly framed as like definitive proof that one political system was superior to the other.
Exactly. And we're pulling from material that covers quite a span, the 1940s right through the 1980s. It documents how victory was used to push ideology, how sometimes just spontaneous acts of friendship could bridge divides.
But also the dark side, how state-sponsored programs could demand, well, the ultimate sacrifice.
That's what we want to get into. Our goal is to cut through the sort of high-level politics and pull out those specific high-drama moments where individual athletes really became these unwilling political ambassadors for their nations.
Yeah, the human stories behind the headlines.
Let's kick things off right at the beginning, maybe even before the U.S. and the USSR were directly, locking horns on the podium. There was some early, pretty unexpected political interference in sport.
Late
Right, Mara?
1940s, right, specifically around the city of Trieste.
Trieste, yes. It was strategically crucial. Absolute pivot point. Geopolitical control of that port city was, well, everything back then.
After Churchill's famous Iron Curtain speech, people literally called Trieste Italy's Berlin. It marked the southern end of that ideological dividing line, stretching all the way from Stettin down to Trieste.
And that's where a football club gets pulled into high politics, Triestina.
Exactly. The local club, Triestina. The sources make it crystal clear that the team's success in Serie A, that's Italy's top football league, was seen as absolutely vital for Italian national pride.
Wow.
It was basically political maneuvering via the soccer pitch, making sure the port city felt connected to Rome, not looking eastward.
That's an incredible early example. It really speaks to the level of state paranoia, doesn't it? A government seeing a league table as a national security issue.
Totally. When the club unexpectedly faced relegation, the worry about losing that propaganda tool was so intense, it actually led to a parliamentary inquiry.
A parliamentary inquiry over football relegation.
You got it. Our sources pinpoint this moment as, arguably, the first instance where a sporting element played a prominent role in the Cold War context.
Yeah.
That's really the start of the diplomats in tracksuits era.
It's just fascinating how quickly that political paranoia ramped up. So if it started kind of subtly on the soccer pitch, by 1948, the Olympics became the big stage for this ideological sorting.
Oh, definitely. The London Olympics that year. Politics heavily dictated the guest list.
Germany and Japan were out, obviously, as defeated powers. But Italy got an invite.
And that invitation wasn't just about sport. It was a calculated political move. Italy's anti-communist position, its key role in forming what would become the Atlantic Alliance, that was definitely influential.
So it set a pattern.
It really did. A
Yep.
diplomatic maneuver, decisions based on international relations, not just who was good at, running or jumping.
Meanwhile, the Soviet Union's whole approach to international sport was doing a complete 180.
Yeah, before World War II, they generally stayed away from big international events,
Mm-hmm.
mostly to avoid any potential public embarrassment.
Right.
But afterwards, that calculation flipped entirely.
Suddenly, winning wasn't just nice, it was necessary.
Essential. Victory on the field was treated as direct evidence to showcase the superiority of their political, social, and economic systems.
So Soviet athletes winning proved the Soviet model was best for humanity.
That was exactly the message. And this sudden, very ideological entry into sport caused friction almost immediately.
Right, I remember reading about the IOC vice president, Avery Brundage. He was worried in 1950 about the USSR joining, wasn't he? Worried about Kremlin interference.
He was. And he was also deeply suspicious about their definition of amateur.
Ah, the amateurism debate.
Exactly. Brundage suspected that Soviet amateurs, often members of the military or state organizations, were effectively paid professionals, which was a huge violation of the amateur rules he championed so fiercely.
And that suspicion kind of defined those early contests, isn't it? The West seeing Soviet athletes as state machines, the Soviets seeing Western amateurism as, well, hypocritical.
Pretty much a clash of systems played out by the athletes themselves.
Okay, so let's get into the escalation. The 50s. The ideological battle really heats up, and the drama spills over from diplomacy into actual, like, cloak and dagger stuff. Defections become huge propaganda moments.
Oh, absolutely. Instant propaganda gold for the West. The second an athlete chose freedom, it was blasted across global headlines.
And that moves us from political maneuvering right into genuine espionage and surveillance. The Fiketova-Connolly affair in 1956 is quite a story.
It really is. Olga Fiketova, she was a Czechoslovak discus thrower, started dating Hal Connolly, the U.S. hammer thrower. And the Czech secret police, the Statní bezpečnost, their internal security agency focused on political suppression, monitored her intensely.
Just because she was dating an American athlete?
The paranoia was sky high. The Czech government tried all sorts of bizarre things to keep them apart, like supposedly orchestrating technical problems during the team's trip to Sydney for the Olympics.
Wow. And they eventually married?
They did, but only under these really specific, quite humiliating conditions, a totally private ceremony. And Fiketova had to agree to be permanently expelled from Czechoslovakia.
Expelled from her own country.
Yes. And of course, the Western media portrayed their marriage as this huge personal triumph of love and human rights over, rigid communist control.
So the state is exploiting love there, but then almost immediately the West seems to start exploiting gender itself, after Soviet women did really well in Helsinki in '52.
Right. They secured a lead in the medal table.
Yeah.
And the American press reaction was, well, vicious.
They called them Red Amazons.
Red Amazons, yes. Accused them of not being feminine, of basically being state-produced athletic machines. The press sisters, Irina and Tamara, were even publicly accused of being men in disguise.
That's horrific, and that led to actual changes.
It did. This Western outrage and doubt directly spurred the introduction of those humiliating anatomical sex testing procedures, pushed hard by Western officials who, perhaps, couldn't quite accept that Soviet women could be dominant athletes.
Connecting this atmosphere back to the athletes, what was the real psychological cost of demanding this superiority? We know Stalin himself got involved in specific results.
The pressure must have been immense. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Stalin apparently took a real interest in football. And when the USSR played Yugoslavia in the '52 Olympics, remember, Tito's Yugoslavia was a major ideological rival then.
Right.
Stalin basically told the sports minister through channels that victory was absolutely non-negotiable.
So the players knew this.
They knew. Reports say they were so nervous knowing their futures, maybe even more, dependent on winning that specific match, that they literally couldn't sleep.
That kind of pressure.
Yeah.
It had to erupt somewhere. And it did, spectacularly, just 4 years later in '56. In the pool. The famous blood in the water match.
Ah, yes. Hungary versus the USSR at the Melbourne Olympics. This was just weeks after the Soviets had brutally crushed the Hungarian uprising.
The timing couldn't have been more charged.
Exactly. The game was loaded with political anger from the start. One Hungarian player, Ervin Zador, was deliberately taunting opponents in Russian, calling them things like invading assassins.
Intentionally provocative.
Totally. And the match just devolved into a violent brawl. Zador ended up getting punched, blood streaming down his face in the water.
And the press reaction.
Instantaneous. The global press immediately framed the Hungarians as these heroic victims, the Soviets as brutal aggressors. It whipped up the crowd into a frenzy. Spectators rushed the pool edge, furious, wanting the Soviets out.
So instead of sport bringing people together...
It absolutely inflamed the Cold War tensions for the entire world to see. A really stark moment.
Okay, so moving into the later decades, this is where it seems to get even darker. This relentless drive for supremacy, it started having horrific internal costs, didn't it?
Yeah.
Especially in the Eastern Bloc.
Yes. The tragedy of Elena Mokhina really throws that into sharp relief. It shows the brutal human cost of the Soviet obsession with dominance, especially after the Romanian gymnast Nadia Comaneci became a global sensation.
Mokhina was essentially groomed to beat Comaneci, right?
She was specifically selected for that task.
Oh.
And her coach, Mikhail Klemenko, forced her to train relentlessly, despite her having an existing fracture in her leg that hadn't properly healed.
Forced her to train on a broken leg.
And subjected her to pretty severe psychological pressure, too. She actually pleaded with her coach not to make her perform the Thomas Salto.
That move sounds incredibly dangerous just hearing the name. What is it?
It's devastatingly complex. A triple backflip with a full twist mixed in. Extremely high risk, but also high reward in terms of points. Designed purely to shock the judges and beat Comaneci, but potentially catastrophic, especially if you're injured.
And she attempted it.
Tragically, yes. Just 2 weeks before the 1980 Moscow Olympics were due to start, she landed badly during practice attempting that very move. The result was immediate, complete paralysis.
Oh my God. And the official Soviet response?
Chilling, really. The Soviet Federation immediately tried to downplay the whole thing, minimized her injury, minimized her importance. They put out statements saying she was just one of a dozen equally valuable athletes.
Disposable after pushing her to that point.
That's the implication. The president of the Gymnastics Federation, Yuri Titov, even suggested that her age, 20, was simply the age at which gymnasts retire anyway.
That's just brutal. A brutal insight into the cost of that state-sponsored system.
Absolutely. And the move itself, the Tomasalto, was finally banned for women gymnasts 12 years later. Far, far too late for Elena Mokina.
What a stark contrast, then, to the propaganda explosion around the Miracle on Ice in that very same year, 1980.
Huge contrast. The U.S. amateur college hockey team beating the dominant, seemingly invincible Soviet professional team. That became the defining Cold War sports narrative for the West.
The Soviets really didn't see it coming, did they?
Apparently not. They underestimated the young U.S. team, played, as one source put it, on autopilot. Meanwhile, the U.S. coach, Herb Brooks, used these extreme psychological methods to basically forge a unified team out of college rivals. Told them they weren't talented enough to win on talent alone.
And the win was immediately framed as
a massive triumph of the American spirit, the whole American dream myth. Proof that free-spirited individuals could beat a rigid state machine.
But amidst all this conflict and tragedy, the sources do offer some glimmers of hope, right? Sport wasn't always a weapon. Sometimes it acted as this subtle, almost accidental tool for peace.
Yes, ping-pong diplomacy in 1971 is the classic example of that. One of the greatest stories of unexpected détente.
How did that start again? It was completely unplanned, wasn't it?
Totally spontaneous.
Yeah.
It kicked off when the U.S. table tennis player, Glenn Cowan, missed his team bus and ended up accidentally boarding the Chinese team's bus.
Just hopped on the wrong bus.
Yep, and he struck up this impromptu friendship with the Chinese star player Zhuang Zedong. They exchanged gifts, chatted. The international press picked up on this simple human interaction.
And that small act broke the ice.
It really did.
Right.
It broke decades of almost total diplomatic silence and isolation between the U.S. and China. That accidental friendly moment paved the way for the first proper U.S. delegation visit to China since 1949.
Which then led to Nixon's historic visit in '72.
Exactly. It was instrumental in setting that up, leading eventually to official diplomatic relations. It just shows how sometimes a simple game, a human connection, could thaw relations where decades of top-down diplomacy had completely failed.
So looking back across everything we've discussed, all the sources, what's the final takeaway here?
Well, the synthesis seems pretty clear, doesn't it? Athletes truly were these diplomats in tracksuits, whether they wanted to be or not. They were right at the heart of this global contest that was often as much about political point scoring as it was about, athletic achievement.
And that brings us right back to that fundamental, maybe hypocritical contradiction you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. The sources keep bringing up this axiom that sports and politics should not mix.
Yeah, you hear that all the time.
But throughout the Cold War, almost every decision on who got included, who got excluded, it was nearly always arbitrary. It depended entirely on geopolitical alliances, on historical convenience, on who was in or out politically at that moment.
You see that double standard again and again.
Absolutely. Think about it. Rhodesia and South Africa were excluded because of their internal apartheid policies, which was a clear moral stance.
Right.
But then countries under military dictatorships, like Pinochet's Chile, which happened to have U.S. backing, they were consistently allowed to compete in major events, like the World Cup.
So the political wins dictated the playing field.
Always. It decided who was deemed worthy to participate and who wasn't.
Which raises a really important question then. What power did the individual athlete actually have when the big governing bodies, the ones supposed to be impartial, often failed to act that way?
That's crucial. Even when organizations like the IOC didn't take a stand or took a politically motivated one, athletes themselves sometimes found incredibly powerful ways to speak out.
How?
By using that brief moment in the spotlight, that medal ceremony, that finish line, they used it to reveal, as one source puts it, worlds hidden from the majority of the audience. They aimed for a kind of moral victory that went beyond just the scoreboard or the political games.
Right. And some of those protests are iconic now. Tommy Smith and John Carlos raising their fists in Mexico City in '68.
Unforgettable image. Or the Czech gymnast Vera Oslavska in '68, deliberately turning her head away during the Soviet anthem to protest the invasion of her country.
Powerful silent protest.
Or even something more direct, like the Polish pole vaulter Ladislaw Kozakiewicz giving that famously vulgar arm gesture to the whistling Soviet fans after he won gold in Moscow in 1980.
Huh? Yes. They were seeking, as you said, maybe a medal for the soul, not just one to hang on the tracksuit.
Exactly. And the sources seem to argue from this that sport, that platform, should be used actively, used as a lever to steer policies toward more humanly acceptable conditions.
So, the provocative final thought for our listeners.
It leads us to today, really. When we see modern controversies about participation or exclusion, whether it's based on a nation's internal politics, involvement in war, human rights records, we have to ask ourselves, are these decisions based on consistent, genuine moral principles? Or is it just the Cold War dynamic playing out in a new era, still favoring those who align with certain geopolitical goals and excluding those who don't? It forces you to question the motivations behind these big international sporting decisions.